This is Stories from the Hackery, a podcast about the students, alumni, and community members that continue to shape Nashville Software School. Nashville Software School is the nation's first nonprofit coding boot camp where a person with aptitude and motivation can gain the skills needed for a career in tech. For more information, visit us at NashvilleSoftwareSchool.com. Welcome to Stories from the Hackery, the podcast series from Nashville Software School. As a follow-up, or really a continuation of the series of podcasts we've been doing on generative AI, we're going to talk to another NSS graduate who has been out working as a software developer for several years, and who, in responding to our most recent survey of grads about their use of generative AI on the job, had a few interesting things to say about work he's been doing with generative AI and more narrowly, a little bit prompt engineering, which is, obviously a hot skill, hot topic in the generative AI area. So we're going to talk today to Ryan Bishop from cohort, I'm supposed to know, 36? 36. All right. Well, Ryan, welcome to Stories from the Hackery. It's great to have you with us here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, John.
So we always like to start these off by just finding out what Ryan's story is. So let's start there, So give us the Ryan Bishop elevator pitch. What's your personal story here?
Yeah, so 36 was an interesting number for me because it was also around the time and age of my life that I experienced my career change in NSS, but mid to late 30s. But rewinding before that, I got into software development via the self-learning route. And I can kind of talk about my NSS story as well. But yeah, I've always enjoyed problem solving, applying myself to challenging situations in school and sports, anywhere I see the opportunity for continuous improvement. I don't know if that just got baked into me because of my environment growing up, but that seems to mesh well with what we're going to talk about here. But yeah, at my core, I love a challenge. I love being able to, stare at a problem almost until your eyes cross. Growing up, I making anything from making jigsaw puzzles with my grandma on the kitchen counter to just figuring out where all the stickers go on toys, which ages me a bit because there was an era where we had to put stickers on all of our toys and they were just numbered. So that was the most fun part for me, I guess. Haven't thought about that in a minute, but yeah. In a nutshell, you throw a problem at me and I'm going to enjoy figuring out how to solve it.
All right. So a problem chewer. All right. So if memory serves, 36 managed to graduate or finish almost before COVID, but not quite, right? Weren't you guys in person up to the last 3 or 4 weeks?
Yes, it was. I look back now and I am very glad, knowing what we know now, that I was proactive about the job search while in school. But yes, we were the infamous cohort that got sent home the week of our final capstones.
Yeah, starting out capstones, go home.
Yes.
Yeah, this won't raise the stress level at all, will it? No.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and you got a gig pretty much coming right out of class, right? And
yeah,
I think you're still at the same place. Isn't that right?
That's right. It's been a journey. I've taken on a few different roles here, but I'm still working at the same shop. Yep.
All right, cool. So maybe bring us up, so you started as a developer. Okay. But if, I think I saw on LinkedIn that you've now had some variety. Are you in a management role now or a mixed role or now?
Back to an individual contributor. So worked for about a year and a half as an individual contributor and then was able to take on the opportunity to manage that team. My boss was getting promoted to bigger and better meetings and I was doing most of the stuff. And anyway, so it was like, oh, Ryan can do that stuff. So did that for a bit. and then had a bit of a life and family change. We had a kid, and after a little bit of time there, I wanted to take some time away and stay at home for a bit. So I was able to stay part time at my company, which was quite gracious of them to want to hold on to me. And I don't remember how long, maybe 6 or so months after that, some other life circumstances happened and some job shifts with both my wife and myself. And in conversation, we're like, well, maybe it's time to go back full time. And I was able to come back full time. And now I'm back on the same team, working on the same projects, but doing new stuff. So yeah, it's been a great opportunity. It feels like I've been able to get that experience of, different roles without having to go through the stress of interviews and
Right.
leak coding and all the things I see on the threads these days about people trying to find jobs.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's actually cool when you can stay in the same place and get the experience of different roles, different kinds of work and things. So I guess I won't ask you about the manager versus developer thing because that's such a favorite topic of so many developers. So we won't
Yeah.
go there. Let's talk a little bit then about, sort of the topic we're focusing on in this series of podcasts. Generative AI, it became a thing for most of us, became a thing in late 2022 when ChatGPT 3 sort of got public visibility and public availability. It had been, GPT had been a thing for a little while in the research world. And, but for most of us, it was like ChatGPT 3. And then we spent a lot of 2023 going, oh my God, these things can code. It's going to wipe out all the programmer jobs and all the things that everybody was saying about everything. And we started doing surveys of grads. We did one in spring of 23. We did one in spring of 24. Are you using it? Are you not using it? How are you using it? Which ones are you using? Those things. And we've certainly seen the trend that more people are using them, but we also still see that there's employers that don't even allow them to be used, don't allow them to even be installed on their work laptops and stuff for developers. So we're still in a state of play, a state of transition, but it does seem like they're becoming a more integral part of the just the tool set, that developers do have available and are using. So maybe we can start a little bit with sort of how long have you been using generative AI tools? What was the sort of genesis or the what instigated that? And well, then we can go from there.
Yeah. I think it kind of trickled in because I don't remember an exact time whenever I can say I was on the bus. I could definitely go back and look at when I started paying for ChatGPT premium per month, but it's definitely been over a year that I've been using that. And our company has company licenses for GitHub Copilot, and that's been fun. Whenever I started, we had our code bases in Bitbucket, and then we made an effort to get all new projects over to GitHub, which was nice timing before all of this because then we got that added benefit. So have been using Copilot probably less than Chat GPT, but I definitely use it whenever I need to and stay in context, which will be a word you'll probably hear me say a lot, or hear us say a lot today, but to stay in the context of the window that I'm working in, whether it be making a code change or trying to configure and set up something, and you want to have that kind of pair programmer, keep your flow. And I've always been very much thinking about whenever I'm trying to solve a problem, like, okay, I found an answer. Was that fast enough? And is this right enough to keep me moving? Right. You find an answer on Stack Overflow as a programmer or whatever. And you're kind of always doing that iterative feedback for yourself, right? Like, did I perform the right search? And it took me, I think the real flip was when I realized that I need to just work in ChatGPT like any other tool and don't treat it as this like, oh, this scary new thing or, this thing that's going to take my job. It really is. It ended up just becoming just any other tool that I would pull out to use for a given situation. Is it the tool for everything? No, but the more you can work with it, the more you can create things that are more flexible to the use case or the problem you're trying to solve. So then as my brain started thinking in that mindset, it's really like, okay, go there. You have an open palette, a blank slate, whatever you want to call it. And you can't be afraid of failing. We always teach that in software development and SS and everything, where it's like, you can't be wrong by just starting a conversation. And that's going to be better than thinking you have to type the right thing, which we can get into in a little bit. But yeah, so I've kind of geared my mind towards that. And I think a lot more developers and also part of just team communications, you have people on your team that are super up to date with all the news and they're giving you information. Like that's such an important aspect is the developer community, almost as like a healthy peer pressure of like, hey, we're all finding benefit of this. We're talking about it and the things that have helped individuals the same way here we are with still named the Hackery. Like that was the whole purpose of the Hackery, right? Is people in the same room sharing ideas, solutions that they found, yelling it across the table, and that just great melting pot of learning happening. So yeah, it's kind of that's where it's at in my mind as far as using it on the job.
Okay. So you mentioned two or three things there. It'd be cool to follow up on a little bit. Um, so you talked about ChatGPT versus GitHub Copilot, where ChatGPT is more this, as you said, open-ended, open palette, open. GitHub Copilot is a much, is a more focused, if you will, and more of a smart auto completer, right? Than ChatGPT just being more open-ended.
Mhm,
Um, and you talked a little bit about at least some of the use case that causes you to use Copilot, staying in context.
mhm,
Um, and yes, that's probably a word when we talk about prompt engineering. It's going to come up a few times.
mhm.
So, what other use cases, as you think about it, what are the other use cases you have, or what are your primary use cases for using ChatGPT or Copilot?
The biggest stuff I've seen, and part of this kind of plays back through my experience as both a developer and a manager, we hammer home how much soft skills are essential on this job, really any job, because, we are the humans in the machine of business. Like the problems that we create and the intercommunication and the languages we use, and that creates more of a problem to solve almost than the ones and zeros of software. And being able to think in that mindset of like we talk about definition of done in a software development ticket is like it's hard to codify and account for all that all the time. Like, oh, I had to go talk to this person on this team, and like the dependencies are kind of masked depending on the teams and the organization and the structure. So, thinking about how to minimize and optimize, I should say, the right information being passed between those parties and speed up that process, I started thinking about prompts around that. Like, okay, we say we're an agile team, but how does an individual think about agile as they do their work? And that's wherever I would say, well, let me go prompt GPT to get me in the right mindset, the right thing to take to the right person instead of me guessing, doing the guesswork, right? Because agile and the roles that are set up in a company should be set up to solve, I go to the scrum master for this, I go to the product owner for this. So that became it in a situation where it was a small team and I might not have quick access to those people. It became essential for me to be like, as soon as I would run into a blocker on a ticket, whether it be just refining the ticket, working on the ticket or anything, I just go be like, "Hey, my agile assistant, I just ran into this. What would be my next step to take?" And without me having to do much like cognitive input into that, I can get a quick analysis of what I think is the best thing and then keep moving. So I actually found that building out a lot of the non-version controlled prompt engineering became more of an interesting challenge because that's the challenges that all businesses have to solve, whether they're delivering software or not. It's like, how do we get everybody working together towards the same goal effectively while they're all wearing different hats and doing different stuff?
O- Okay, all right, so that's really interesting. So that's sort of a total non-code building use case, right? It's more of a project management or project flow facilitation kind of a thing, which is, you know, well, again, that's really interesting because we don't, I think at least in the tech world, we don't, if it doesn't feel like we hear as much of that as a use case, right? You know, our arguments are all about, is the code that's generated any good? Is the, you know, what is this thing going to help me do? Sort of thinking in the narrow sense. So you're thinking in a broader sense, which is interesting. I've got some friends that have their own businesses where they've talked about, where they rave about using ChatGPT as a tool in sort of the way you talked about, right? So now, when you're using it in that mode, you know, you said that your prompt is something like "Hey, Agile Assistant," or so. So are doing some of the, and I can't remember the prompt engineering words right now. I could ask ChatGPT, but I won't. So you're doing that. I want you to play this role kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that, and maybe what different roles you've asked ChatGPT to play in your use cases.
Yeah. So that's been the most fun part about building out prompt engineering, which, like, for any individual non-developer or developer, figuring out how you can become a good prompt engineer is, I think, an essential learning aspect to take away from this talk, from any other things you read online. And GitHub has great content on that, on their official docs and everything. But really, what it all boils down to is context, like we said. And what's been the boon of generative AI is, like, context for us was always so toss it over the fence to the internet, right? We would go search for something, and then it's our job to be able to piecemeal together, like I said earlier, did we get what we expected from Google? And then, for the advanced folks and developers and everything, they quickly learn that there's advanced Google language to filter out things you don't want, and that's power user stuff. And while that's all fine and dandy, like, we all have had this end goal in mind of, like, I just want to talk to the computer and it gives me the answer I want, like, so it's crazy to think that we are actually living in that world now, but to embrace it, people have to talk to the computer. And like you said at the start of this is a conversation. Like, the back and forth ends up determining the flow and also the benefit that you get out of it. So an essential part of that is the feedback, either via the official mechanisms. ChatGPT's got the little thumbs up, thumbs down, but also just telling it, like, oh, that wasn't quite right, which I think kind of plays into, in software development, what we teach, right? Is you're going to read more code than you write. So same with prompt engineering. You're going to read more prompts than you write. So to understand it is the only way you can actually iterate and make it better, is to basically treat it like a coworker, or however you want to see it, and say, that's not quite what I was expecting. Can you do this instead? And just like, I think Pemberton or someone else said, like, in one of the previous podcasts, like, it has infinite patience. So you could talk to that
Right.
all day and refine. And that aspect, combined with coming back to the context thing, the way it saves context between your prompts. So we talk about prompt engineering. For those that don't know or haven't dove into it, you create separate prompts for different discussions you want to have in any of the standard things. But the ability for it to remember your context is essential, because then, without you having to provide that context each new time, then it becomes so much easier to be like, in a development role, I'm in a development role at a company, I'm at this level, I use these technologies. And then later on, when you ask a question, it's going to give you your context versus someone else. And I think that's just as a developer, we go, yeah, that's how it should work, right? That's how I'd expect it to work. And the fact that it can take all that in, and the context windows are getting bigger, and the craziness of stuff that you see with the other things that we could talk about, like Notebook LLM and all the research based stuff out there, is the crazy things they're doing, is just wild.
Oh yeah. Some of this stuff is just, it's wild, and it's moving so fast, right? We haven't figured out how to use the stuff released 2 years ago yet totally effectively, or get it embedded in our work, our own personal workflows. And then this wild new stuff is getting announced. It seems like every week, right? It's
Yeah.
like, So,
You mentioned embedded there. I also wanted to make another comment is that subtlety. People that might not use ChatGPT or Claude or any of the other stuff, you're starting to see it just built into tools that we use every day.
whoa,
And that is becoming now probably we'll see a whole group of people that weren't the early, you know, early adopters that will be like, oh, it's telling me to try this thing and it gives them a really good answer. And, I tried that with Atlassian just for generating tickets. And yet again, 80% is good enough for me whenever it's just work that saved me 2 hours of ticket writing and it's close enough within the framework of a software development role. And I was like, sweet, this is better than having a meeting or an individual sitting down and writing out what they think. Instead, it's our job to review the AI output, which has been great.
right. Well, and that embedded use case is another, I don't know, form, if you will, of prompt engineering. Because what we've been talking about here is mostly prompt engineering in dialogue through the chat interface to chat GPT. But when we're embedding things, well, there's still prompting involved in that. It's just we may not see it, right? Because that embedding happens via an API.
Mhm.
And to get it to work, somebody at Atlassian has got they've got canned prompts for, again, maybe the different use cases that you can invoke it in within Atlassian, writing a trouble ticket or whatever, where basically embedded a prompt
Yep.
that gets invoked every time somebody goes to write a ticket or whatever, right? So have you had opportunities to do any embedding,
Mhm.
where you're trying to figure out what is the best prompt to embed with this thing?
I have dreamed of having all of our Slack communication via a bot where you basically, you give it over and it's like able to tell like, oh, looks like it's like Clippy coming up, right? Like looks like you're asking a question that's been answered 12 different times at this organization in 6 years. Like here's a canned response with with Confluence docs. Like that just seems like Slack every day is trying to come out with better features around. Like I just saw
Right.
recently they introduced this like ask the expert. You can create an expert channel and then basically put all those people that like heaven forbid they ever got hit by a truck, like you can't lose them at their company. They become the experts, but it's like we shouldn't have to rely on that, right? We should have the technology to be able to consume the language of a business and empower people to get answers they need without having to go knock on someone's door like the good old days.
Right.
So that's what I think about, like how long it's going to take until that's just standard, right? I'm happy to have a bot give me automated responses immediately versus, oh, that person's on PTO. So I have to wait till Monday to talk to them to get an answer, like, or go doing my own searching, which is an important skill is knowing how to search for things you're looking for, depending on the context and everything. But not everybody thinks in that way. They just want to try to get done the thing they're trying to get done as quickly as possible. So it creates delays. But yeah,
Right.
embedding, just wanted to throw out another comment too of like, for those that don't use the explored GPT's feature in Chat GPT, it's so cool to just go. I mean, people can create prompts and share them to the community and just, I mean, it's just been like Minecraft. People are like, here's all the things I built, go try it. And it's just crazy. There's more than I can even go look at. Like I almost don't have time to go explore them, but I've done a few of those in the software development realm. Here's a software architecture one or a project management one
Oh, cool.
that helped inform me how I can build my prompts on the fly. Because for me, my workflow is easier to just hit a key command on my computer that pulls up chat GPT and I just start. I want to try to get the conversation flowing as quickly as possible. But if I'm in more of a planning mindset, I might go, or exploration mindset, I'll go check out some community prompts that people have shared. So great feature to check out.
Yeah. So, right. The pre-canned, what they call GPTs,
Hmm.
are really just a bundling of prompts with, right.
Yeah.
So, um, and it may be a step towards agents. There's another research topic that's going to keep us all excited for the next few years.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little, let's talk a little bit about coding. All right, the coding aspect of using these, certainly one of the things that developers think about a lot is how can I use this most effectively? How much can I depend on it? How much can I trust it?
Mhm.
What again are the use cases for me as I'm trying to write code? Because, we all know that there's coding and then there's coding.
Mhm.
So sort of how do sort of what's your experience been on the coding side in terms of how are you feeling like you're seeing productivity benefit there? Are you feeling how do you feel about the quality of what gets generated? Um, what are the use cases even within the just doing software development where you think the tools provide the most assistance or have to be watched the most, that kind of thing. I'll just kind of open that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it comes back to, for me, thinking about how someone solves a problem. And I never really had something that I could tell you as far as like, I don't know how I solve problems. I've just been doing them my whole life. Like, and I've gotten good grades. I seem to be fake it till you make it, if you will. But a book that I discovered, if I could probably have spent 15 minutes telling you about my actual story that led to NSS. But long story short, a book that I discovered, which you may know, not many people, unless they're deep into software development and the history of it, know. Are you familiar with the author Christopher Alexander, the
And the
architect?
and the pattern language book. Yeah, man.
So
Oh, awesome.
So I had it out because I wanted to have it on a specific page that really, I think, so yeah, I have both books, The Pattern Languages, which is
Yep.
basically like, inspiration for Wikipedia and everything. Go look it up, everybody on the internet. It's a whole rabbit hole of amazingness. Anyway, Gang of Four was inspired by this guy. But in this specific context, I think this is the perfect thing for what we're talking about today. He mentions that each pattern is a three-part rule, which expresses a relationship between a context, a problem, and a solution. And I think whenever we talk about context in prompt engineering, it's everything. And really software development, really any problem solving. But do you know what your problem is? Do you know how to solve it? If you don't, you have to figure out that context, and that's the only way to really come arrive at a conclusion of a way to solve it. There's no one way, but really that's how I gear my mindset. And I think it comes back to things that we teach, right? At NSS, if you don't know what to do, we say, well, break it down into smaller steps, write comments, pseudocode. We call it a million different things, but really it's all this goal of you trying to get better context of what you're trying to do. Because if you don't, then what are you doing? You're just a you're just a monkey on a keyboard, just trying stuff until it works, and you don't know what you actually did. So that's what's been for me. It's the same applying that same process that NSS teaches you is have a conversation with yourself, but now you can have a conversation with the computer to externalize your thought process and then approach that around problem solving where you actually get to validate or learn or a combination of the things, which is also essential is you need to validate that you either remembered something correctly because you think you knew, but that can be dangerous. That was right yesterday, but it might not work today. So that's really what I would tell anyone with prompt engineering and using it for development, because I'll apply that to any coding problem and I need to understand what I'm doing. So if I look at a ticket and if there's unknowns about it, I'm going to reach for a chat GPT, same as Google, to understand what's this framework do? Why are we implementing it? So that I can ask my first questions can be better than just, that might be your first questions. Tell me about this thing. I've never used it before. I have a ticket to work on it. And you start thinking that every blocker you get in your head could be a prompt to GPT to get you started, which is that fake it till you make it. And it's like you learned along the way. You can now approach that problem, that ticket, whatever it be, code, configuration. I don't work in configuration all day. I just want it to give me the configuration files I need, run a thing, see if it works. Those are big ones. Using Copilot within the code, I think I don't know how long it'll take until we can kind of have a shared language around like writing better code as teams. I've seen GitHub's Copilot code review, I think in alpha or beta, where it's like that's the levels that I'm getting excited about. It's like where you have that another team member that's
Right.
egoless, that can apply the common logic across the whole team's PRs or whatever, and be able to say like, "Ooh, just so you know," and actually help you learn along the way versus having to rely on that senior dev with 20 years of experience or whatever. So we're still in that infancy, but I think if people are able to build up that mindset while we're in this phase, I think it will help them be next level prompt engineers and or employees, software developers, whatever role you might find in technology.
Okay. For anybody listening who wants to get, kind of get deeper into prompt engineering, it sounds to me like the way you described your learning process, it was mostly experimentation. It was mostly trial and error, but you did mention GitHub's docs, which are pretty good. I think I've looked at those. Any other resources you use that you found other than ChatGPT? Um, but are there any other resources that you use that you'd suggest people check out if they want to kind of get deeper into this?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost for anything is go to whatever tools you're comfortable with, because that's going to be the easiest way to overcome that barrier of entry. Is that if you're uncomfortable with going and watching a YouTube video that I recommend, but if YouTube's your jam and you watch 3 hours of it every night, go type in prompt engineering. There's so many content creators that, you know, are going to give you information that's useful, even with all this, like we've said, it's embedded in, you're getting AI responses in so much stuff nowadays there. But yeah, really GPT. I mean, staying within the context, like for this meeting, I was wanting to spend some time putting together some notes in preparation other than what previous notes we've already shared. And I literally went to GPT and I was like, can you give me my feedback of like what I've been doing based off of the context so that I can use it? I'm going to be in a podcast talking about Gen AI. And I had zero hesitation to do that because it saved me hours of work of thinking about specific things. And it knows the context almost better than me, probably because it remembers everything I've asked it. And, or it's going to go, look at that whenever it generates its responses. And it gives me my context in a nice little report card. And that's someone that's obviously massaged the prompting and built it, is going to have a much more fleshed out report there. But really start small and don't be frustrated. So that goes with both writing your prompts and also just finding docs, because everybody's going to tell you their way that works. Like,
Right.
and or try to sell you that. I would say beware someone that tells you you have to pay to get this information, because there's so many great free resources out there, and NSS and everyone else, use the communities that you're already comfortable with to find out how to, if you really truly want to understand prompt engineering, it's just more data than you can learning that you can consume right now with a wealth of content out there. So yeah, I don't
Right.
live, it's hard to say one place because hashtag the internet, you know?
Yes. Right. Right. Well, yeah. And as fast as this moves, you know, anything that's getting published in book form or whatever, it takes that cycle so long that things have just moved on. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's
so
like, I feel like it's too fast too for a full-time developer slash parent. Like I just heard about, I think it's called Sora from OpenAI.
right.
It's like the
Right.
video stuff. And like, all I know about that is one headline. And I'm like, oh, okay. But I haven't gone and done my own, like, what does this mean for me yet? Like, so
Yeah. 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 Sora sounds fairly awesome, but yes, that's over in that bucket of someday I'll have time. Um,
yeah.
so, um, so from the perspective of NSS, you've referenced NSS a few times. One of the things we've wrestled with since generative AI came out is, well, what do we teach our students? What do we teach beginners,
Mhm.
right? People who've come in Now, my recollection is you were a little different. You'd done some coding, right, prior to NSS, right? Self-study based, but nonetheless, you had some insight, you had some experience, right? And from your classmates, that wasn't true for a lot of them, right? So we're bringing people in who don't know how to do this, who really don't have any context on, if you will,
Yeah.
right? And trying to get them to the point where they're job ready for their first job. Um, so let's stay in the context though of software development, and not think about data analytics or data science. But in that sense, what do you, by the time they graduate from NSS, right, and they're job ready, like the traditional NSS grad has been job ready for a junior job, what should they, what should they have experienced with generative AI? What do we introduce them to? What don't we introduce them to? Or what don't we let them do up until some point, maybe, So what are your thoughts now? Since, you got out before this stuff was available. So you've learned it on the job, but as you think about what a junior should know, in this environment, because skills and competencies are shifting out from under us here. What thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, that I could answer that probably 12 different ways depending on the day or time you asked it. But
Yes, so have
um,
we. So
two things come to mind, which is probably going to sound more like a mental health and wellness answer, but it's this: like, there's more than you're ever going to be able to know about software and software development and the history of computers. And it is a journey. So, with that, no matter where you get on the train, just know that the train never stops, and there will always be new, bigger, and better trains. And you can choose to, if you want to upgrade. I think an aspect of that is being okay with knowing you're not going to know everything. And that's probably the hardest thing, because then that empowers you to go learn the things you want to learn. And if you apply that mindset, which people call it growth mindset, whatever you want to call it, then you're not mentally blocked to learning daily in everything you do, because it does become a mindset that drives your education and growth. I think it's kind of a myth at a lot of places. It's like, oh, well, in a 10-day sprint, 9 days are spent working. And then there's one day where you go learn things. It's like, no, we don't we can't compartmentalize that well yet. At least I've not seen it. Instead, you got to be figuring out your workflow to learn as you go. So what NSS, I believe, would do, which I feel like is the whole curriculum of NSS, is learning as you go. Do you understand? And it tries to present it, you guys obviously do a really good job of trying to cover the spread of experience levels. And it is up the individual. There's work to be done. It is school. There's homework. So don't be, I would say, for anybody attending NSS, don't be feel behind if you have done zero homework prior to day zero. But there will be more work for you to do if you've not been doing that work. Because, like I said, we've all faced it at NSS, because we are all spring chickens compared to people that have been doing this for decades. So we're all behind. It's okay. We're all here to support each other. And just know that there's a community around that. And I think that's where, places like NSS, as long as there's community and people willing to continually pull the people right behind them up, then that community will help new developers actually feel like they're job ready. Even if it's only 20%, that's better than complete imposter syndrome mindset going into that first job. And then you realize you get to the job and everybody's faking it till they make it. So, like I said, just breathe out. It's the other step to breathing in, is breathe out and just enjoy the ride.
yeah. Well, yeah, and in periods where we have sort of this big technology transitions happen, like now with generative AI, or like in the late '90s, early 2000s with the internet, it even the guys with 20 years experience are faking it till they make it, because they don't have 20 years of experience with that technology, because that technology just got invented 2 weeks ago. So, you know,
Yeah.
um, this is one of those periods where the playing field almost gets leveled between newbies and senior people relative to the new technologies, right?
Yeah.
You know, I think this, but I do think this is an instance where you still do have to have the foundation in the old. Because if you don't know how to recognize if code is correct, you don't know how to tell if your eager intern code generator buddy, code, GitHub Copilot or whoever has hallucinated or generated good code or generated good tests or
Yeah.
whatever, right? So,
Yeah. And I think, NSS, even if it was just one day, there was one day we spent where we showed what is, everyone writes in React or Vue or whatever, but what is that actually doing under the hood? And like that
right.
alone, even if you saw it for one day, I know that something else, some magic is happening. And so, yeah, to that point, don't be afraid to pull back the green curtains and find the wizard that's pulling the strings, because like that magic is going to actually then inform you and help you grow your knowledge of how does a client server communication work. And you start to add in your own context slowly but surely, ticket by ticket, day by day. And then you look back and you're like, oh, I actually do know how to do things. Like, whoa. And you can pat yourself on the back. But yeah, like you said, we've leveled the playing field, and I think we've normalized that no one should be afraid to ask a question to either a TA or a lead instructor. No one should be afraid to pull up a prompt and just talk to a large language model to get information. That's how we use Google. Say, I'm seeking something I don't know. Just now you have a easier way to hopefully get more succinct, potentially ad-free information with links, and like your own curated Wikipedia page to be able to go then do your own learning, and that's where it gets fun.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that use case, the sort of super search expert, right? Gen AI is a learning buddy, right? Or as a coach or as a tutor, right? Not as a code generator, but as a answer these questions, help me understand how this works in this language. Oh God, remind me what that function was because I haven't used it for 6 months. That sort of learning aid. That's the way we, generally students get introduced here. It's like, no, don't ask it to write code because
Yeah.
you wouldn't know. Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, the other shoe's gonna drop if you start going down that path. So, like, in a pinch, yes, if you've never written code like that before, but you then better ask it also to explain to you what each line of code is doing. If you've never, obviously read it first. Read it first.
Yeah.
Take a
Please,
second and read it.
please read it. Right. Well, yeah. And to me, that's not a lot different than, I mean, we've been teaching students, or we taught students, we still do, to use, again, Google search, to use Stack Overflow, right?
Yep.
But again, what's the next thing you say? Don't just copy and paste the code, right? Or if you copy and paste it and it does get it past what was blocking you, stop, figure out what the blocker was now. Why did that fix the problem?
Yeah.
Right. And at least how can I rewrite this so that it fits into the code that I've written, not just be this lump that is so obviously different.
Yeah. And then that, if you're applying this kind of Zen, good developer habits mindset, the why, and the why becomes your commit message, right? Not just
Right.
fix problem. And someone else is like, but why?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, exactly. So, well, so before I switch gears to do a few little wrap up questions, and I'm going to come back to Chris Alexander too, because I don't get a lot of NSS grads talk to Chris Alexander. So that's very cool. What else would you say? What else would you want to, tell me about prompt engineering, or what haven't I asked you about prompt engineering that I should ask? And, if it's ChatGPT's answer, that's okay too.
Yeah, no, I'm going to look at just my notes that ChatGPT spit out for me. I think I already touched upon it, but definitely give it the context of who you are within a realm that you're comfortable with, right? We're not forcing anybody to say things they don't want to, but you can like, I think that's also another way to think about framing the problem in a way that doesn't expose company information or whatever. It's like if you actually know how to write out the problem without saying, business specific words or whatever, you're already a step closer towards understanding the why. You can actually apply a pattern languages mindset to, hey, this generic thing, this API, not this uh, company name API. That's like, okay, now it knows, but that's really not useful to it. You can just say it's a express API or whatever. So if you can kind of write in those generics, I think that will also help you become faster at coming up with prompts because you're already doing a filtered step of context for it versus if you give it domain specific language and then it has to try to understand what this thing, what this acronym means or whatever that it doesn't understand until you've talked to it, then that's going to cause more friction, more back and forths. So I think there's that. Let's see, have fun with it. Honestly, like I would tell people to have prompts for their life because everything you do in a day is one big algorithm of multi-threaded processing to make your life happen. And you are the cog in the machine that enacts that life. And it can be very stressful. But whenever you have a GPT or something that can help you get an answer to a problem when you might be stressed or, anxious about something, and it can just get you something, whether it be eating the elephant, breaking the task down into smaller steps so that you feel comfortable, same as a software development ticket. Be like, oh, well, that step is just calling somebody. Like I could call I know how to make a phone call versus some bigger problem than you're making in your head. So I think applying that mindset to reaching for your, phone or whatever to be able to, and that's a whole other world of like now with Apple Intelligence, like the embedded in the smartphone is going to be the next wave of just being able to talk to your device and get such a more interesting context of answers back on device to be able for personal management, task management, time management type stuff to where I think that world, because modern world and everything is so overwhelmingly stressful due to all the, well, do I use this app or do I use this app for my to-do list? And then you got 12 to-do lists, like all of that kind of condensing down into one place is kind of how my mindset of like being able to have a few tools that are very useful, but not so many disparate things. That's where I kind of see the future of it, like less apps and more just like it's just naturally there. But yeah, have fun with it because you can then apply that to software development. It doesn't have to be this rigid, like I go use it to generate code. You can tell your prompt to make it fun and whatever way makes it like you can even say, I'm having a bad day, but I need you to help me write code. And it's gonna then make an effort to, you know, try to
Mhm.
try to make your job a little bit more enjoyable. And the fact that you get to use as developers, we get to use these tools for our job and it's everyone's on board with it. Like it's especially with the work, COVID, work from home, hybrid, all of us being separated. Like we don't get these, like I felt so blessed that we were in person at NSS and it's like we're the old guard and like and so, to be able to interact with your colleagues and time is money and everything, to be able to have that assistant and them also being an enjoyable assistant, I think it makes the job more fun.
Okay, great. Okay, so let me hit you with a couple of change-up questions.
Okay.
Well, maybe we'll do Chris Alexander. So, how did you come across Alexander? Because, I mean, because his work has had some very big influences in the software world. We talk about patterns all the time in object-oriented programming, the Gang of Four you mentioned. Um, but Alexander, for those who aren't familiar, check him out. He's an interesting guy. He was an architect, passed away a few years ago, but he invented or conceived of this concept of a pattern language. Because what he did, he was looking at the sort of generic architecture all over the world, right? And there are patterns, right? There are patterns that repeat themselves in parts of the world. And, due to climate similarities or differences, due to, right, you get steep pitched roofs where you get lots of snow, you get flat roofs where, all those kinds of things. And he sort of came up with this concept. And the one book you showed, he's got this amazing pattern language, this huge book of all these different little patterns, right? Different window designs, different designs for floor plans. Where do you have an interior plaza or mezzanine? Where do you not? Right. So,
Flexible office space is what I opened up to just here. Yeah.
but I remember, late 70s, I think it was. It might have been early 80s, but late 70s, there was a guy in the software world. It showed up in two or three places fairly close together. But I think it was a guy named Larry Constantine who wrote a book called Structured Design, which was a software design book that sort of took as a point of departure this whole concept of patterns, right? And there's different patterns you can use for designing software systems based on the flow of data, based on this, based on that. And at least for me, that was a very influential book. And, you know, and so much in software from the lowest levels up to the most high levels, we talk about architectural patterns and all those things. It's just hugely influential. And once you see it, you start seeing the patterns and everything, right?
Oh, it's so much fun. Yeah.
So how did you come across Alexander?
Well, I am gonna give, I think what I hope this is the answer, but either way, it's gonna give everyone a nice little entire different journey that they can go down, which is kind of comes back to my how do I get to NSS story. So let's just frame it within that context.
Yeah,
So my wife and I moved to Nashville in early 2018, and I was able to, at my previous employer where we lived, I was able to get a remote, basically say like, "Hey, we're moving. I don't want to lose my job." They're like, "Well, we don't want to lose you. I think you can do this remote thing." We had an acquisition and a bigger company already had remote employees, so it all kind of lined up. And so I kind of just took the plunge, and they're like, "Yeah, we're cool with that. You travel for work anyway." So part of that job, we were supporting lab and analytical equipment that does near infrared analysis and also has, computer software built into that. And they were just running free version of Microsoft SQL database. You get to the 10 gig limit, you got to figure out how to get stuff out of that database. So like that was my introduction to software, was actually like hacking into a system to delete old tables of NIR analysis until the system's working again. So SQL is actually where it started. But then whenever I went remote, I had a colleague, and I worked on such a great team. It felt like it was software developers. Application specialists was our title, because we kind of handled the technical side and also customer facing side, building out these regression models for food and feed and pet food analysis and everything, the moisture, protein, fat content values you'll see on your dog food bag or whatever, guaranteed analysis type stuff. Anyway, so I started writing some just scripting stuff, auto hotkey for the specialists out there. It's an interesting little language, and also some like VB script stuff, like automating some Excel reports and everything. And I started to like question, like, am I becoming a software developer? Like, what is? So then, like, I downloaded my first Python book, one of those free. The
right.
guy came to PyNash one year and talked, but I can't remember the author's name. But one of the ones where you get to build like Space Invaders or whatever on your local machine, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like copy paste pasting the code, didn't know anything about the Python syntax, and just like hoping and praying that it worked. And then whenever I got the big full page error message, it's like, okay, what? Anyway, that started to kind of unfold this world of like, okay, I'm spending time on the computer and learning about all the aspects and like, what does it take to be a software developer? And I learned about the terminal. And one random night I was Googling or something, and I learned about this game. It is a game, I believe it's still active, called Telehack. Everybody should go look it up. It's awesome. You can play in the browser, but it all started because I was just looking like, what are cool things you can do in the terminal? Like there's like the Star Wars ASCII movie or whatever that like you can, I think, send a curl request to get like an abbreviated Star Wars movie. Like there's so many cool things that people have built that are just out there to discover. But in Telehack, it is a snapshot copy of all of the BBS systems that you can actually link into and play this game built around that as far as like hacking. And they have so many free resources in that game and games, text-based games that you can play. It's just such an amazing world. And you can actually chat with other people in the chat relay in there. So go check it out, telehack.org. But you can play it in the terminal too, which is the fun way to play because you just SSH in or whatever. And you're playing in this, but it has like free books and everything and like resources. Like I had never heard of the movie War Games. Is that the one with Matthew Broderick and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
Right.
like there's so many like little Easter eggs of the history of computing and software that were in there that I learned while in this immersive environment. Felt like I was, obviously I never experienced the BBS systems. Um, while that was the internet to people, that were just like, this is
Right. Right.
so cool. But I think somewhere in that, there was mention of like a list of resources of just like the great things in the history of computing and software development that have actually been influential that you might not think about in movies. And the pattern languages books ended up getting brought up in that and then something else. And for some reason, I just was like, yeah, no, that sounds interesting. And I picked it up at the library and then I was hooked because I was like, oh my gosh, this all makes sense. Like I've thought about these things before, but I've never had someone to talk about. And it's like, so yeah, it's a fun world. But yeah, telehack, pattern languages, and like you said, it's a lifetime of discovery and learning because once you apply those pattern languages and you see them, you can't unsee them. You just can't.
Oh yeah. It just becomes part of the way you look at the world, right?
Yep.
Which is interesting and scary all to itself, but it's still very cool. All right. All right. That's fun. So we've been going here for an hour or so. Appreciate you being as generous with your time as you have been. Could hitch. I'm gonna throw one of our sort of frequent wrap up questions at you. It's the one. Well, it's one I probably my favorite because it gets such interesting answers from people. So, what's your technology guilty pleasure?
Ooh, it's probably an easy answer right now because I just purchased an iPad, the newest iPad Air, and I'd held off. The only previous iPad tablet I ever had was an iPad Mini 2, which was really useful for work trips and small and portable watching movies on planes and stuff. But that was so outdated and just part of my daily flows of stuff. I try to be good about like screen time and everything and, presence and obviously having a toddler. But it actually, the kid dilemma was actually a reason for the answer of the iPad is like I had started drawing again. Well, she's interested in all the drawing supplies. And so you can't just have a bunch of art supplies laying out and around because, like, well, supervised drawing time with the toddler is fine and dandy. Like, maybe this keeping this all just in one place with one pencil. So it's my first time with an Apple Pencil and a modern iPad, and I've used it mostly for drawing, also for watching. I'm rewatching Lord of the Rings, as is customary for most of us nerds, but really just learning that so back in high school, I had to make a decision between a science route or an arts route, and I went science and thought I wanted to be a doctor. So I kind of gave up art, put the pencil down, if you will. So now I'm in trying to get back into that. And I was very purist minded of like, no, I just need to get a set of drawing pencils and everything. But it is crazy what you can do with the Apple Pencil. And so just like having fun with that. And we talk about staying in context, being able to switch between different media and do different things.
Right.
The features that are built in are just pretty fun to play with. It's a good
Uh,
time.
oh yeah, it's wild what some of those drawing apps will let you do between, like you say, the different media, watercolor versus oil versus the different looks, the different,
Yeah.
you know, it. it's crazy stuff. It's very cool. All right. So, well, and having the toddler to work with is, yeah, if you can keep them drawing on the iPad instead of on the walls or the floors or the ceiling, that's all good too.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of those kind of art projects. Uh, how did that get over there? Oh, well,
The
all
worst
right.
problem is you don't even know when it happened. You're like, I
Yeah.
couldn't.
Yeah. How has that been there for a while? Have we just been missing it because we're so used to stuff showing up? Or did that happen like last? I don't know. All right, Ryan. Well, hey, Ryan, thank you so much. Really appreciate you spending the time with us. It's always great to catch up to NSS grads and see what they're doing a few years out, but keep exploring. And I think there's a lot of great advice in what you've said here about just people giving it a try. And I think the way you talk, the more broad applications of it, right? I think a lot of us in text, we tend to burrow into, oh, let's see if I like that code, right? Or, man, maybe it'll write the test for me so I don't have to think about it anymore. So we've heard a lot of that. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, if it doesn't do anything, the fact that it writes tests, I love it.
I would definitely tell folks, go listen to the previous podcast, because I was telling Mandy before we got on here, like Brandon's context of the business side of it. What $1 trillion problem is generative AI going to solve? We don't know that yet, but software developers can all be pretty sure that it's going to be baked into the tools we use moving forward without a doubt. So start learning it within this field, because I don't see it going anywhere.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's early days, right? So you said that a couple of times as we were talking. It's early days.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, Ryan, thank you again. Great to have you on with us. Best of luck. And based on when we're recording this, have a Merry Christmas with your family. All right.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for listening. You can find links to some of the subjects we talked about in today's podcast in the show notes below. And hear more insights like this when you visit NashvilleSoftwareSchool.com or listen to our podcasts at your friendly local neighborhood podcast purveyor.